Chapter 2, Making Promises. The gray speckled horse from across the back fence eyed me as I struggled to breathe. His grassy meadow bumped up against the long row of yards behind our house that on any given day became our kickball diamond, baseball field, or football gridiron. I'd been playing frisbee with my crew from the neighborhood when I began to wheeze. It wasn't unusual for me to get winded while playing at recess or with the guys on Samarin Road. In fact, ever since kindergarten, I'd had trouble breathing when I was active, or if it was really cold or hot outside. I assumed it was because I was a heavy kid and running just took more effort. But this day was different. I'd ignored the symptoms because I was having so much fun with my friends, but when my breathing didn't improve, I went inside to see if rest and cooler air would help. Still wrestling for each breath, though, I began to feel scared. It felt like I was suffocating and that I soon wouldn't be able to breathe at all. Why hadn't I come in sooner? When I heard Mom's car in the driveway, I knew help was on the way. She walked in the front door and climbed the stairs where she found me on the couch. I just pointed at my chest, struggling to suck in air. Without hesitating, she said, "Baby, get in the car. We're going to the doctor." 20 minutes later, we arrived at Dr. Morris's office. The moment we walked inside, a nurse who was standing near the check-in desk took one look at me and asked my mom what was wrong. Scared me. "He can't breathe," she reported. Even though she tried to hide it, I could hear the fear in her voice. "Do you know how to get to the hospital?" the nurse asked. "Take him right now. Don't wait for the doctor. He'd tell you to go to the hospital too." I heard Mom praying to Jesus as she drove to the hospital, asking him to protect me. We rushed into the emergency room of Lynchburg General Hospital. At this point, I couldn't catch my breath enough to speak. The clerk looked me up and down to decide how serious my condition was. Her face pinched as she looked at my symptoms. "Can you breathe, sweetie?" the woman asked. I shook my head no. I'd always been able to recover before, but this time I felt like someone was holding a pillow over my face. Sweat was pouring down my forehead, even though the hospital was air conditioned. She didn't waste any time. She called a nurse and we were ushered right into an exam room where she clamped my finger with something she said would measure the oxygen in my blood. Mom held my other hand, the way she always did when I was sick. Then the nurse listened to my breathing with a stethoscope, first on my chest and then on my back. "Let's get you some oxygen," she said, as if she were offering me an ice cream cone. I was only 10, but even I knew that getting oxygen wasn't optional. I continued to try to suck in air with no success. I started to wonder how long I could go without breathing properly, and even Mom started to seem panicked, losing the calm facade she'd maintained since she'd found me at home. It was as if the nurse's calm demeanor made room for Mom to finally express the fear she'd been hiding for my benefit. The nurse left the room and came back with some kind of machine. She put a clear plastic mask on my face and attached it to the machine, which was producing a steamy gas. "Your airway is swollen shut," she explained, "and this should open it back up. I want you to leave this on. You good with that?" Anxious, I nodded yes. She watched me expectantly, waiting for me to give her a signal that I was improving. Only I wasn't. She checked with the clamp on my finger and didn't look like she liked what she saw. The nurse said to my mother, "I'm going to get the doctor. We're probably going to need to sedate him and intubate him." She hurried out of the room. My mother rubbed my back and assured me, "You got this, baby. You're going to be just fine." I wanted to believe her, but I was terrified. A tall doctor with gray hair rushed in, his white lab coat like a cape behind him. "Hey, buddy," he said. "How you doing?" Taught to be respectful by my mother, I opened my mouth, but I wasn't able to make a sound. He kept talking as he checked me over. I want to put a tube down your throat to help you breathe. And since that's not always fun, Kathy is going to give you a shot that's going to help you relax. Before I could worry about the shot, it was over. Sounds became distant and I felt myself drifting away. The last thing I remember seeing was the worry on Mom's face, and the last sounds I heard were her fierce prayers to God to help me. Finally, answers. When I woke up, Mom was still by my side. "Hey, baby," she said with her sweet smile. When I tried to speak, I felt a mask taped to my face and realized there was a tube down my throat. Feeling sort of freaked out by the sensation, I looked to Mom for reassurance. "Don't try to talk," she coached. "You breathing okay?" I gave her a thumbs up, and despite how weird it felt to have a tube in my airway, I was no longer gasping for breath. "If the doctors say you're doing all right, we can go home tonight," she explained, "but you'll need to stay in bed for a while at home." The doctor came to check on me a few minutes later. I wanted to ask him what had gone wrong, how this happened to me. Was it permanent? Why couldn't I breathe on my own? But all I could do was wait for him to give me the answers I wanted. "You doing better?" he asked. I nodded yes. The doctor explained, "You've got something called asthma. Have you heard of that before?" I shrugged my shoulders, poked out my lip, and looked up to the sky like a weird emoji. I'd heard the word, but I didn't know what it meant. He continued, "You know how sometimes when you're running, it feels hard to breathe?" Had my mom told him that? I nodded yes. When your lungs work hard, they can become swollen, making it hard to breathe. I understood what he was saying. I hadn't been out of breath because I was fat. I was sick. I wasn't sure which was worse. "And what happened to you today was called an asthma attack." Giblet. Sorry. "And what happened to you today was called an asthma attack. The good news is we can give you some medicine to help you feel better, and I'm going to give your mom a list of foods that will be good to you." That didn't sound fun. Not if vanilla chocolate swirl ice cream wasn't on the list, which I suspected it wasn't. "Do you have a pet at home?" he asked my mom. Now I really didn't like where this was headed. "We're taking care of my oldest son's dog right now, a mutt he got from the pound." "No, I don't want to lose Princess." "I hate to say this," the doctor said, "but no pets." No pets! My situation kept getting worse instead of better, and if we had to get rid of Butch's Cocker Spaniel mix, it was going to be all my fault. He then turned to me explaining, "I want you to be active, doing things like walking, swimming, or biking, but I don't want you playing team sports." If I could have screamed, I would have. My eyes flew open wide, and I looked to Mom to tell the doctor what was what. "That isn't going to be easy for Rashad," she said hesitantly. "He loves football." I shot her a look as if to say, "Not easy? That man just gave me a death sentence." The doctor thought about this. "I'll make sure his pediatrician gets our report, and he can keep an eye on it. But it is possible he could have another attack if he overexerts himself. You'll have to be careful." I prayed that my pediatrician, who knew football was my life, would understand the seriousness of the situation. I had to play football, no matter what. Living with asthma. I had mixed feelings about being diagnosed with asthma. I hated that I had this new label that meant sick, but I also felt relieved knowing that there was a reason I'd been suffering. When I'd reported to my gym teachers how much I struggled on the mile run, they'd always treat me like I was lazy or out of shape. Yes, I was big, but I wasn't lazy. Now, the doctor's diagnosis legitimized my symptoms. I began taking an inhaler with me everywhere I went. The kids teased me whenever I had to use it. So as often as I could, I kept it hidden away in my backpack. If I had to use it, I'd be as discreet as possible, dipping into the bathroom, or even trying to bend into my locker so no one would see. I also started to recognize what weather conditions and which activities were most likely to trigger an attack. Mom learned everything she could about asthma and was my superhero protector. If she was taking me and a friend to a restaurant, a mall, or a movie theater, she'd park first and instruct us, "Stay in the car, I'm going to check and see if anyone's smoking." That was back in the day when smoking was allowed in most places. If a public place was filled with smoke, we'd keep going. What was more unwidely than public smoking, which we could choose to avoid, was smoking under our own roof. Most of my early childhood memories feature my dad with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in another. In his youth, he had been a very gifted athlete. He played football, basketball, and baseball for E.C. Glass High School, where Butch had also attended. In fact, Dad earned a full scholarship to Nebraska University to play defensive end for the Huskers. But my parents, who'd been high school sweethearts, started their family early. So instead of heading off to college as the first in his family who would have done so, my father joined the Air Force to earn money to support his young family. He served in Japan prior to being discharged with a disability before I was born. The years he spent in the service hadn't been kind to him, and he suffered some difficult days in the aftermath. Because Butch was 14 years older than me and Brian 10 years older than me, their experiences with our father were very different from mine. They remembered a tall, strong leader who was the kind of father every boy dreams of. He playfully roughhoused with them when they were small. He showed up to support them at their Little League games. He was actively involved in parenting, but after he retired, Dad became someone very different. He began smoking and drinking, and as a result, the father I now experienced was a shrunken version of the one they'd known and loved. At first, after my diagnosis, Dad smoked outside our home instead of inside. He'd wander out after dinner or before dinner to light up, but after a few months, he was smoking in the house again. One day when I was 13, while Mom was still at her job at a local radio station, I was downstairs after school when I smelled smoke wafting through the vents. Dad knew the doctor had warned me not to be around smoke, and yet he continued to smoke when I was near. It seemed to me like his cigarettes and alcohol were more important to him than I was. I'd had enough. I grabbed a t-shirt from my drawer and walked upstairs towards my parents' bedroom. Pressing the shirt against my mouth and nose, I opened the door to Dad's room and tentatively stepped inside. My heart raced as I considered confronting my father. I asked Dad the question that had been burning in my heart for years. Can you stop smoking and drinking? If not for yourself, then for me? No kid wants to say that to his dad. I knew there was a chance I'd make him mad, and what kid wants to jeopardize their relationship with their father? Part of me also feared that I discovered that cigarettes and alcohol were more important to my dad than I was. I had no idea how he'd respond, but I felt like I had no choice. Dad took a swig of his drink as he considered my request. Watching the routine gesture I'd seen 1,000 other times made my stomach clench. After he thought for a moment, he posed a question back. "Rashad," he asked, "what do you want to be when you get older?" I perked up, though I felt a little confused by his interest. Dad had never before asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. For years, I hungered for him to take that kind of interest in me, and it was finally happening. Even though the cigarette was still burning in his hand, I didn't hesitate to answer. At 13, I knew exactly what I wanted for my life. I want to play running back in the NFL. Dad took a puff of his cigarette. As his face turned sour, I recognized the anger I'd grown up knowing to fear. "Rashad," he challenged me, "you honestly think you can make it to the NFL without drinking and smoking yourself?" I stepped back, feeling like he'd punched me in the gut. For that brief moment, I imagined that he wanted to know me, to my hopes and dreams. but he was only interested in cutting me down so that I'd feel as low as he did. Clouded by pain and misery in his own life, he couldn't see me for who I was. My hurt quickly gave to anger. I refused to receive what felt like a curse from my father. Voice trembling, lungs burning, I told him, "Dad, just to prove you wrong, I'm never going to do it. I'm never going to drink or smoke a day in my life." I turned abruptly and left, closing the door more loudly than I should have, and went outside to breathe the fresh air my lungs were craving. My body relaxed, but my mind couldn't. My father wasn't a bad man, but I didn't want to be like him, using substances as a crutch to get through the day. I was old enough to know how hard it would be to stay away from alcohol my whole life. Kids I knew at school were already drinking, but I was stubborn and determined, and most of all, I wanted my father to know that I could do better than him. Making that vow to be different than my dad when I was 13 was one of those critical if moments for me, maybe my biggest. Although my outburst was driven by pain and anger, it turned out to be a decision that saved my life. It doesn't make any sense, but there are people with asthma who risk their health by smoking, and research shows that children of alcoholics are 4 times more likely than others to develop alcoholism. If I had let the statistics or my father's low opinion of me define me, I wouldn't have achieved what I had. That if moment made it possible. I still believe that the promise I made that day saved my life. Little did I know that years later it would also save my dad's life. Meeting a hero. In addition to my dream of one day playing in the NFL, I also wanted to grow up to be a guy people could count on. For me, that meant choosing not to smoke or drink. I longed to be the kind of person my own future son or daughter would respect, the way I admired Butch and Brian. As an athlete, I wanted to be the kind of player kids would look up to and adult fans would admire. The first time I got to see a live NFL game, I was 14 years old. My big brother Brian was playing tight end for the Tennessee Oilers, and Mom and I drove 10.5 hours to the Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium in Memphis to see him play. I was thrilled. Throughout the game, I kept my eye on number 27, running back Eddie George. In 1996, George had been drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. At 6'3" and 235 pounds, he was a larger running back, which captured my attention. After the game, I was determined to meet him. Giblet. As the team was heading towards the locker room, I ran up and thrust my program and a pen in his face. "Can I have your autograph?" I begged. "Sure, kid," he agreed, taking my pen and signing the program. Then Eddie George dipped into the tunnel along with the other players. When Brian walked by, he gave me a high five. I could not remember a happier moment. Eddie George was living the dream. When I looked at him, I could see the life I wanted for myself. I made a mental note that when I made it big, I'd pause to give kids my autograph too. Giblet. Oh my gosh. Making a point. Huh? Okay. Making a point. Despite the fact that I still believed I would play in the NFL one day, I decided to take a break from football in the 10th grade. I was tired of not playing. I was tired of hearing people tell me that I was too fat and too slow. So I decided to take the season off from playing football to get myself in shape. Giblet, get off the couch. I had a plan. Work out, get stronger and leaner, and come back for junior year a totally new player, the one the coaches wanted in the starting lineup. But it didn't happen. Giblet. While I was sincere about wanting to get in shape, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know the best kinds of foods to eat. I didn't know how to lift. And cardio, I still took an inhaler with me everywhere I went. If I ever did cardio, it was by accident, like when I was late for the school bus. By the time Brian had graduated from Virginia Tech and played 2 years in the league as a tight end for the New England Patriots, the Tennessee Oilers, and the San Diego Chargers, Butch had graduated from Liberty University and had been trained in training camp as a fullback with the New York Giants until he experienced an injury. Upon rehabbing, he went on to play a year in the Arena Football League with the Milwaukee Mustangs. They were both amazing role models for me as players and as men. When I told them I was going to take a break from football to work on my fitness, they both supported my decision. Although my dad didn't seem to notice I wasn't playing that year, Mom loved it. She was always secretly, sometimes not so secretly, concerned that one of us would get hurt, and she didn't really want any of her sons playing football. Okay, wait, I'm trying to get off the couch. Let me start that over, okay? She was always secretly, sometimes not so secretly, concerned one of us would get hurt, and she didn't really want any of her sons playing football. But knowing how much we loved sports, she encouraged us to try others. Baby, go on, play tennis, she encouraged me. Rashad, she once suggested, what about golf? Why don't you try out for the basketball team, she asked. In 10th grade, while my friends on the football team were finishing their season, I finally took her advice. I decided to try out for the basketball team, despite the fact that I had only played hoops in the neighborhood with friends and never on an organized team. The reason? My friends who played basketball for Jefferson Forest had been talking trash, saying that I couldn't make the team. And that really lit my fire. If there was one way to get me to do something, it was by telling me that I couldn't. Ever since that first day of Pee Wee, when the coach wouldn't let me be a running back, I'd become the kid who wanted to do the impossible, even if it was just to prove everyone wrong. I showed up every day of basketball tryouts and gave my all. When the coach posted a list outside the gym displaying the names of the guys who'd made the team, I was proud to find my name on it. And then I quit the team. Sounds crazy, right? Why go through all that effort if I wasn't going to play? I hadn't tried out for the team that year because I wanted to play basketball. I tried out for the team because my friends said I couldn't actually make the team. I wasn't about to let them or anyone else dissuade me from being whoever I decided to be. I didn't know it then, but that was my first step toward growing up into the man I am today. Not a quitter, though the basketball coach definitely wasn't happy with my stunt, but someone who won't listen when the world is telling me, you can't. My friends didn't think I could make the basketball team. My dad didn't believe I could move into adulthood sober, clean, and tobacco-free. But I refused to let the negativity of others keep me from becoming who God made me to be. I suspect that you'll face obstacles in your life that might be similar to mine, or they might be very different from the ones I faced. Maybe you live with a physical or intellectual challenge. Maybe you've been labeled as the class clown and people don't expect much from you at all. Or maybe people in your family or community expect you to follow in the footsteps of a dad who abused alcohol or an uncle who went to prison. The negativity you face does not determine who you'll become. That doesn't mean it's easy to ignore the naysayers. It's not. But rising above the attitudes and opinions of others is possible. In fact, I'm convinced that you already have what it takes to overcome the obstacles around you. When you decide that nothing can stop you, when you vow to live well and take the steps to do it, you can achieve your dreams. Chapter 3.